I'm headquartered here on campus in our Ag Systems Technology department, as well as still have maintain a small percentage of time working with Extension. When I was asked to do this talk, I related back. So some of this is not necessarily cutting edge, but I think it reminds us of how we can, just from a fertility standpoint, even in this was some work that we did a number of years ago, actually up in Sullivan County, where we began to think about, could we use some of the same techniques that we were using in row crop production from a soil sampling, grid sampling standpoint, and look at variability of soil nutrients in a field. And even in this small field, if you look at sort of the results of what we would come up with from a soil testing standpoint from this, and you can see that a lot of times management-wise, even in a pasture, we'll see that some parts of pastures get neglected. I'll look at the P map, and you'll notice closest to the legend is where the gate is going into that small pasture hayfield, and you can see that there's probably a little more attention, probably fed some hay there. From a fertility standpoint, we move down across and over the slope, and we see some very low P levels in this field. The K and even the pH, there's a little bit of variability that's related into the landscape and where we're at in that field. If we actually turn that into a more of an application map, you can sort of see that areas of the field that need more attention from a fertility standpoint than other areas of the field, not only in phosphorus and potassium, but also in lime. And bottom line, using the technology, the K really, if you put it on a per acre basis, we were able to save quite a bit of fertility from that standpoint. The lime, maybe you won't say that you really saved anything, but in the end, we spread it to where it needed it and to adjust for the pH accordingly. So that's sort of a simple example, but brings home to me the importance of maybe using this technology to do some type of targeted sampling. If grid sampling is one of those things, then that's what we do. Todd Lorenz is on next, and we initiated a project with some of our other fellow colleagues over in Cooper County a few years ago, and just looking at here we were comparing systems of if we were going to use precision ag or just use a whole field management standpoint in a forage system. And again, it sort of a little bit looks at the same results that we've seen up there in Sullivan County, that we were able to target where nutrients should be applied. The problem has become, it sort of leads into the next part, is that in a row crop situation, we have another piece of information that's very valuable to us, and that's production information, where in a forage-based system, we haven't had sort of a production. So how do you really know really the true effects of what applying 10 pounds of phosphorus or applying amount of phosphorus someplace compared to other areas truly is? And we have explored, and I think we've came a long ways from being able to do some things in the yield standpoint. So, it doesn't take a whole lot to do the sampling, even on a grid standpoint. I just kept in an old slide I had. You can use a recreational GPS receiver to put some waypoints in that you would navigate out to in a field. We don't have time to get into the technicalities of it, but we can use some tools to do that. In today's world, with the technology we have, if you're using a smartphone, you can put those grids. You can actually walk the pasture or hayfield that you're interested in. put a boundary in it, and it'll lay the points out for you that you would then navigate to the soil sample from to get that information back in a way that spatially looks at how we could apply that there. So that's one aspect of, I think, is still valid even today, of looking at the variability that probably exists. Some of that might be soil related, some of it management related, especially if we're feeding hay in pastures or paddocks. The nutrient load that has been created in those areas can be offset by the amount of fertilizer that's actually needed out there from that standpoint. So just mentioning the yield. So in the study that we did from a precision ag whole field management standpoint, we were also interested in exploring how we could try to measure, pounds of forage or tons of forage per acre on a spatial way that we could develop what you might consider a yield map for forages. And we promised we had some promising results to begin with. We were just going to use some sensors that we had used in nitrogen application on corn, side dress application, looking at color of corn. Here we're sort of also looking at color as well as biomass. Actually, the near infrared portion in this particular study that was being reflected back had the best correlation of yield. And you can see that, we were able to make sort of a yield map, and it was based upon treatments that we had out there in this particular field. So we had some promising results, though that wasn't super correlated. So we moved on. One aspect early on that we tried to look at, instead of looking at color or reflectance of wavelengths, we looked at an ultrasonic sensor that actually measures the height of the forage. Can the height of the forage be correlated back to the amount of biomass of forage we have? So here's some initial work that worked with John Laurie at Linnaeus at our Forage Systems Research Center. We had John had laid out a study looking at winter hay feeding, and we were able to measure height of forage fairly well. I won't go into the aspects of the treatment, just to show that we had some treatments. And the one particular sensor map that I was looking at is this paddock down here in the lower left-hand corner that's got the 3 bale rings, and you can sort of see some dark green forage compared to other forage there. That's where, in this case, it's sort of the inverse is what. So the blue is actually the taller forage where the greenest is, and actually the red is the shorter forage, and you can sort of get a understanding of maybe how we could measure production from that standpoint. So we actually did some more work in this case with the work that we did over at in Cooper County, and looked at we actually physically measured yield in pounds of dry matter per acre, and then we looked at how well the ultrasonic sensor in those strips would correlate back to that physical yield there, and we had some good results where the height of the forage was well correlated with the amount of dry matter yield that was actually physically harvested off of the plots. So we were able to then point out this map is in height of forage. So red, in this case, red is a slower growing forage, and then we turn that into an actual production based upon the equation that was developed there, that we could see differences. Now, this is somewhat artificially made differences because of nitrogen rates, but it was able to develop some calibration to show that the work was promising of being able to do that. We did find that the stage of forage had a little bit of an influence on how well correlated the sensor readings were to the amount of yield. You really couldn't, you had to do things sort of separately. You really couldn't combine everything together and sort of begin to wash out if we just looked at the calibration points. If we looked at the entire plot of readings, we had much better calibration. So the thought is that we can understand the closer this R squared number is to 1, the better correlation we have. So we were able to make some sense out of that standpoint. Sort of moving on things. So the yield is important. So if we want to sort of test things and understand what a treatment might do, or how fertility varies, are we getting our bang for our buck for how much fertility based upon production that the forage might. So we've begun to explore more about how we do a lot of stuff in row crop production where we might test a nitrogen rate against a different nitrogen rate, and we can use the yield monitor to gather that information to do that. It's become, again, a harder thing to do in a forage. So we're moving forward on that. So again, up at the Forage System Research Center, we were trying to test some other technologies, but we had, this is not truly a grid sample, but sort of a grid sample, if you will, of an area that had been divided up into some paddocks that we took as a whole field, about 30 acres, I believe it is. So we were interested in a phosphorus study to see the effect of phosphorus. So we've got soil test P, and then we've got soil test K there. So what we have done is we put just some strips, not necessarily based upon soil test, but just 0 compared to 50 pounds to see if we would see any response to the amount of phosphorus that we would apply. We could use the soil sampling data as a background to see if we had response in certain areas over other areas. And then the map on your right is a map of, we ended up deciding that we would correct the potassium in a potash application that was variable rate. So we worked with our local fertilizer dealer up there, and they were able to use a spinner spreader. We were actually able to put some different products in there, and then they were able to collect data that we could see what we actually physically done. So on your left is the phosphorus map of the strips, and then on your right is the variable rate as applied potassium map from that standpoint. So the technology allows us to do that. And then as we moved further on, actually some of our forage group, Rob Kallenbach, led a group with some specialists, Ryan Locke and Danny England, and they've pretty much perfected the technology of the ultrasonic sensor. It's a system now that they call paddock track. They've been testing it statewide as far as forage growth in pastures, more of an accumulation, maybe not as much of a yield mapping side of it that we're doing, but taking paddocks and accumulating and have an average of the yield in that area, or understanding of the growth that's happening. So we're collecting the data in more of a yield map situation. I don't have any results to show you as of today, but we've been collecting data that we'll have, and hopefully here in the near future be able to show some of that. So one of the things that we're promoting further on this coming year, besides this, the phosphorus side of it, is we're looking at putting out some strip trials using the technology in a nitrogen setting. So we initiated another little trial at the Forage Systems Research Center where we're looking at extremes here where we've got 0 pounds and 150 to see how sensitive the sensor is to those changes in production in the forage setting is what we're doing. So we're taking readings that are perpendicular to the treatments and getting a feel for how that works. up there from that standpoint. A couple of things I want to finish off. I think one technology, if you're not using some type, I'm assuming most folks are applying fertilizer to forages with a spinner spreader that's probably drawn by a tractor. If you don't have some type of guidance to help you apply that, I think you're maybe spending a little bit more money than you're needing to as far as total product applied, whether you're doing a variable rate or not. It just seems to be something that you should be looking into with the used market of precision agriculture systems today. Easily under $1,000, you can have a system, and I think you can pay for it depending on how many acres of forage you have. It could be paid for in a year is what I'll try to illustrate here next. So being able to do that in the field. So I took a scenario looking at some fields that ranged in size from 33 to 79, so not too big in this case, I would consider these pastures that total about 810 acres. I analyzed, so part of it is product. The other side of it you could even fine tune it enough to say that you could save some fuel, because the more overlap that you induce into the system, the further you actually drive. There is some things to say about that you possibly could slightly increase speed. So time is a factor. And if we're looking at fuel consumption on a tractor, that's in gallons per acre. So if I can save time and distance, then I can potentially save dollars per acre, even in fuel used to apply the fertilizer. Now, while it doesn't amount to a great deal, you'll say, well, 12 cents an acre, I've got $2.50 as my fuel price, 15 cents an acre, between 5 and 10% overlap. That's just part of it, but that is a valid part to think about. To me, the most important part to think about, and again, it depends on the price of the fertilizer and how much you're doing, just a 5% overlap in 810 acres would mean that I would apply an extra 28 acres, almost an extra pasture or hayfield, without using guidance. And that's going to cost me, again, we start to add dollars per acre. And if we look at a low cost situation, that's not as much, $1.80. But if I am spending quite a bit of money on fertilizer and trying to do my best from a management standpoint, I can get over $5 an acre. 5 times 800 acres is $4,000. I said $1,000 expended for a light bar. Even $2 an acre saved, pays for the light bar in 1 year. If we go from 5% to zero or almost 0% overlap. So to me, this is sort of one of those no-brainers that using the technology to help us apply the product, whether we're applying at variable rate or not, is very valid in doing that standpoint. So one other area that I added here at the end, I guess I still got some time here at the end, was utilizing drones. And to me, a drone might be part of precision ag technology. It depends on how you look at it. So one area might just be monitoring livestock that's out there from a standpoint. So I've done some testing in doing that. And the drone technology that we have today allows us to do this on a fairly, I shouldn't say, it depends on how you think of cost, but $1,000 can get you a system that you can do what I want to show you here. My video works. There's no sound of the video, so Here I am sitting on my mom's porch. These are my brother's cows. He was kind enough to let me fly over. So you can get close and see, you should be able to see the ear tags in those animals from that standpoint. So I'm just flying out over the animals right now. You will notice that there comes one cow up over. So if you haven't experienced a drone, it sounds like a swarm of bees. So there is noise involved, and the animals don't like it. But if you notice, I'm backing off. I'm getting out of their flight zone. Those animals will stop. So even from I think if I could get good enough that I could probably herd those animals by understanding a little bit more about how the drone would affect into their flight zone. But you'll find out here they won't take too much. I did notice, depending on what the animals are doing, I had flew just a little bit before this, and they were up actually eating hay that my brother had rolled out. They were a little more calmer about. They were more interested in eating the hay than me flying over them. Here they were just sort of taking their time, and they didn't like what I did. Another way of thinking about what you could do instead of flying like this, we use drones quite a bit in row crop production for scouting, and we've used them to help develop maps for nitrogen application. So this image is actually a raw picture, but I flew the pasture just like I would a crop field. So this picture is actually from 100 meters or about 300 feet in the air. And you can pick out the animals. And my brother told me how many, in this case, it was a group of heifers around this old pond. And I counted all of them from the drone image, except for a couple. And we concluded that they were up underneath the trees. It was sort of a warm day. So this is another way of maybe collecting data, of monitoring livestock that's out there from that standpoint. So
I'm going to discuss our soil fertility test that most everyone's familiar with, and also go over the soil health test. A lot of the components that I'll be talking about actually apply to both row crops and forages. So I'll kind of drift back and forth from time to time. And there we go. So first we have to understand soil diversity in and of itself. It's that dynamic natural body of minerals and organic matter for plant growth. And that's irrelevant of whether it's row crop or forage crops in general. And we all know soil provides the water, the mineral, the aeration, the support, and anchorage for the plants. An ideal soil is about 50% solid, consisting of mineral and organic matter, but it also includes, excuse me, the organic residues from plants, animals, and other living organisms. And, the background or moral of my story as it pertains to soil health is that microbial community. Here's the pie chart: 25% water, 25% air, 45% mineral, and roughly 5% organic matter, give or take. But it's this little slither right in here, the microbial component, that's that part of this machine that holds it all together. Here's our normal soil fertility soil sample information sheet that you have to fill out. It includes your crop code and your yield goals that you have to send into the lab with your soil sample. When you get your results back, you're going to get a soil test report that looks, similar to this. And there's, two basic components to this. This is the soil test information up here, and then there is also the nutrient requirements or your recommendation, your fertility recommendations. And so the soil test information there at the top of it looks like this. So it's got the actual chemical results, what's in your soil. And I like to refer to that as what's in the tank. And so there's this nice rating gauge with all the little dots on it that show you where you're at relative to the crop codes that you put in there. And so I kind of like to refer to it as the fuel gauge. And so here we see the pH is just touching the low end of the rating scale, whereas the phosphorus is up here in the very high, almost excess range. And so that has some management implications to it, whether you're row crop or forage. Down at the bottom, then you got the nutrient requirements, and I've blown it up here a little bit. And so for this example, the gray on the left, the cropping code was 10, which is alfalfa grass hay, and their yield goal was 5 tons per acre. Well, alfalfa is a legume, and so there's no nitrogen recommendation. Our phosphorus level was in excess, so there's no phosphorus recommendation. But at 5-ton yield goal, we still are going to need 235 pounds of K2O. On the right side, it also will reference your limestone suggestions. And so, albeit the results were showing that the phosphorus was just touching the low end of the scale, it didn't trigger a calculation effect at that time. But it's certainly indicative of maybe needing to pay attention and maybe not waiting that 3 to 5 years before you sample again, especially on alfalfa production. And why is that important? I use this liming for efficient fertilizer use scale here as an example of why lime and pH are so critical in your production. This chart shows 6.5 pH is kind of the general rule of thumb where most all of our plants can yield effectively within that range. That's the sweet spot that all the plants kind of like. So even when we drop down one level of pH at a 5.5 pH, the efficiency of the fertilizer is dropped to down to 90% here, basically on nitrogen. It drops in half on phosphorus, and the potassium can handle just a little bit more acidic soil before it starts affecting your production. So it's a very critical piece or component in our management or production systems. And so what does that mean overall? You're basically looking at on the right here about 20% wasted fertilizer just with one pH level difference. And so, you know, as a rule of thumb, if we look at it from this standpoint, for every $100 that we put on this 5.5 field, we're basically throwing away $20 because it's not being utilized for the crops. And it doesn't take long to do the math to figure out that that's an economic issue for us. So I want to switch over to that little slither from the pie chart, discussing the soil health. On the left side here, we have, when we're thinking about a comprehensive assessment, we've got the chemical, which we just talked about, all of that chemical data. We've got the physical data, which most people can conceptually understand. How deep is our topsoil, whether or not we have compaction, whether that's from equipment or livestock in general, which also affects the bulk density, their aggregate stability, and all the other physical components. But that little slither that I was talking about is that microbial living community. And we kind of think the old adage, out of sight, out of mind. It's below the ground, so we don't think about it as often. And most of the interest is in the above ground appearance and so forth. But when we're talking about soil health, it does actually include all that biological information. And so this sweet spot in this diagram is that great combination of chemical, physical, and biological components. And that's the sweet spot that we call soil health, where everything is functioning properly. So soil health defined in general then is that function within a natural or managed ecosystem boundary. And I know that sounds a little strange, but each one of us, whether we're farmers or ranchers, researchers, or homeowners even, we all view soil health differently because the function to us is also going to mean something different. So I want to discuss some of the components of soil health. And, you know, again, we're going to drop back to this, the microbes and what they do. But just to give you a bigger perspective of actually what's going on under the ground, out of sight, out of mind. So what do those living soil microbes do? We all know about organic matter, and those microbes are what break that organic matter down and release the mineral nutrients that are tied up in that organic matter back to the system. And so they recycle and regulate carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And if we didn't have those breaking down all that organic matter, you can imagine the organic matter stockpile would be about 3 miles high if we didn't have something breaking those down annually and releasing that back into the system. We also are aware in our legumes that there is a symbiotic relationship with some of our bacteria that help fix nitrogen for plant uptake as well. On the row crop side, that would be soybeans. On the forage sides, we're looking at some of our legumes, clovers and alfalfa, etc. So the microbes also can increase plant root mass because of their association with the roots. It's a symbiotic relationship, and where they can stretch the roots out even further. And I'll show you a slide of that coming up. The microbes in the ground, they're also a natural cleaner. They degrade the pesticides. They can eat up any sort of pesticide residues in the ground. They also can help control disease. But overall, this symbiotic relation with the microbes, out of sight, out of mind, is they have this innate ability to improve soil structure or that aggregate stability, which also results in better infiltration. So the water is percolating into our soil instead of running off. And if you're in dryland agriculture, whether that's row crop or forages, the more water that you can keep in the soil and not run off, the healthier your plants are going to be as well. And overall, then the microbes then provide sort of a climate resiliency. We can take those stressors from this Missouri environment where we basically have Michigan winters and Georgia summers. And so we're in a transitional climate zone where that temperature and precipitation fluctuates continuously. We're kind of in the bullseye of that transition zone. So here we have something that kind of reiterates that. Kibblewhite made the same sort of comment as, back in 2008. While the chemistry and the physical components of the soil system provide the context, it's the soil biota, the biology in the soil, which is adaptive to change in the environment. And on the left, the photo is, microscopic levels of bacteria and fungi and so forth. And the photo on the right includes all of our other more macro size beetles, earthworms, fungi, and even vertebrates there as well. So all of that is completely tied to the system. And so that association that occurs is in the rhizosphere. That's where the roots meet the soil. It's that zone of concentrated biological activity in and around that root. And so the bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, and the nematodes all hang out. And as we think about the process of photosynthesis and capturing that energy from the sun, utilizing the carbon dioxide and smacking all that together to produce carbohydrates or sugars, which go down to the root and then through the xylem and phloem go back up and help the plant to grow in both directions. While all of that activity is vigorously growing, these bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes all have an association with that root below the soil surface. And the roots exude that carbohydrate to help feed those microbes as well. And so one of the components is that Arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, the AMF, and they are the mycelial fungal strands that extend to plant roots. And so they attach to the roots and they share that carbohydrate. They take it, but they also, the fungal mycelial may extend out as far as 9 feet further than what the roots can reach. And that association, then the fungi can also pick up extra moisture that far away and nutrients and create an exchange with the plants. And so that's sort of some components of the microbiology that we really don't think about very often. The versatility of that mycorrhiza in the soil as well is fostered by crop diversity. And that can impact both row crop and forage crops as well. So the diversity above the ground equals the diversity below the ground, which creates more resiliency. It helps those microbes in disease suppression, and it supports and sustains increased microbial activity as well through those roots. So again, just to reiterate, the soil microbes are not just a biological function. They improve the soil structure. They reduce erosion by increasing infiltration. They reduce transport of agrochemicals to the ground and surface water as well from the physical soil function standpoint. They also improve nutrient or chemical soil functions as well in the breakdown of all that organic matter and releasing it back into the system. So when we're thinking about managing for soil biology, the basic principles, whether you're row crop or forage production, is to reduce the disturbance. We want to increase the cover or the growing life above the surface, keep plants growing as long as possible. So that might mean crop rotation in row crops and including cover crops. With forages, might be just introducing some plant species diversity. So the more crop types and species that we have, that's better for the microbes and living roots as long as possible. Back in 2014, we had the cover crop program, which has some implications on the forage side as well. By 2015, they implemented a mandatory soil health sampling process to be involved with that. And so all of that had to do with starting this process of calibrating and determining some soil health assessment measurements. And so we had to determine how to measure or assess the soil health. And along about that time, the university was involved with developing the SHAC, which is the Soil Health Assessment Center. We call it SHAC. This is a new list of measurements that provide more data for us in our management process. It's a newer assessment, so we have to build the database. The more data that we acquire, the more refined the results are. So we're still in the data collection over time. So here is a printout of the Soil Health Assessment Center's soil health report. And you can see on the right a much larger volume of things that you're going to get information on. And we're not going to have time today to talk about each one of those independently, but I will cover a few of them. So now that Todd's been talking all this time, you may be overwhelmed, like much of the undergraduates in this photo, but I'm going to try to break it down for you. Having data is not a bad thing. The more data you have, the more effectively you can manage your system. So one of those things that are on that soil test are the total organic carbon. And that's the amount of all the carbon in your soil. It's highly correlated with soil nutrient cycling, pore space, water holding capacity, soil microbial activity, and nearly all the soil health and soil functions. So it's kind of a general overview that we all kind of know the more organic matter we have in our soil, the more productive we are. But we just didn't ever think about that with all of that microbial activity that was going on under the ground. So the total organic carbon represents plant and animal residues in the soil at varied stages of decomposition. And so your soil health report is going to come back, and this is what the results are going to look like. This is a 5 producer fields, field 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then that calibration component that I was talking about, the county average is listed there and also the Missouri average. So as we collect more data, we are going to be able to refine those results. But overall, it gives this producer an understanding of where he's at. And so we have field 1 and 3 that are above the county averages and the Missouri averages. We have field 2 and 5. They may need a little bit of work. Those results may be dependent upon whichever crop they had at that time. But the red flag right here is field 4. And we can see it's, well below half of the county average, maybe a third of the county average. And we also see a third of the Missouri average here as well. And so field is a shining star of something that this producer really needs to be paying attention to and start thinking about the aspects of how we can build the total organic carbon in that field. Active carbon is another result. It's the oxidized carbon mineralized or decomposed by the soil microbes. It's the available mineralized nutrients over the next growing season. So it's what's to come. The total active carbon result is more resilient in the soil, reacting to climate change. And we still need more calibration on this subject. But here again, active carbon. And as we might suspect, active carbon is going to give us similar results. Field 4, again, is the shining star, and we're going to have to do some work on it. One of the key ones that I think is very important, whether you're in row crop or forage production, is that potentially mineralizable N. It's that organic nitrogen that's available over the next growing season through microbial breakdown of organic matter residues. And so it's what provides us more nitrogen for plants over time, which ultimately then results in less need for nitrogen fertility. Just from a biological standpoint, nitrogen also is the energy source for these microbes. They need some nitrogen to help break down that organic matter to release the N, P, and K back into the system as well. And so again, this is the same producer. And again, field 4 is really shining as a problem child. We've got field 1 and field 3 that are kind of running right along with the county and state averages. Field 2, we may have something to do a little bit there. Again, it may be where we're at in our rotation cycle, or it may be other management issues, but it certainly brings focus to the producer, just more data for them to try to discern what's going on in their fields. And then I always like to show this one. This is the phosphorus because it's a chemical thing that we can all kind of relate to. And so here we have the scale at the lower right, very low as 0 to 7 parts per million, all the way up to 35 to 68 parts per million. And so I tried to break those out with arrows the best I could based on this scale. Okay. And so here we have several things to talk about. Field 2 all of a sudden shows up as the shining star of being very low, which is inhibiting production, whether that is forage or row crops, either one. But field 1, field 3, and field 4 are in the very high range. So if we are continually adding phosphorus to either one of these 3 fields, we are not only hurting ourselves from an economic standpoint, but we're also introducing this environmental concern too, for phosphorus to run off with any sort of runoff, soil loss. Just more additions of phosphorus are just not necessary. And in fact, field 3 here at this excess phosphorus level, we probably won't need to put any more phosphorus on that field, depending on the production level, for probably 5 years. I certainly would, want to monitor it after 5 years. And maybe the same with field 1. There's a long time that we can go without having to include phosphorus in our package. So any of that phosphorus that we would have put on the fields out here should in turn be put on here to bring this production level bar up here even higher. So as a result, with each one of these components on that list, you also get a nice little information sheet, general recommendations on the management things that you can do to help improve in most of our examples here, field 4 and this phosphorus level field 2. So it talks about the things that you can do to help improve those different components. And again, I don't have time this morning to go over each one of these in detail. And so I just kind of skimmed over the highlights. So soil health considerations, the more you know, the more you grow. And that's paying attention to all of the data that you can. We want to assess and improve our soil health based upon the data that's available. It improves the capacity of your soil function within the ecosystem that you're working in. It helps you maintain environmental health. It helps you promote plant and animal health. And it helps us meet the growing population demand for food. The expectations out there are pretty exponential on the growth of the world population. But I also want you to consider that it is a generational gift, that you're working on your soil health now for those in the future. So there was an old ancient, actually 2 of them here, ancient Indian proverb: treat the earth well. It was not given to you by your parents. It was loaned to you by your children. And also then, we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And I think that gives us good context in to the fact that it's time to sort of start shifting our thought processes from just what's above the ground to the whole soil system, and assessing our management practices that include considerations for the microbial population in the subsurface. So good production practices: improve your soil health or balance in pastures and row crops. And a lot of these cross disciplines, whether you're row crop or pasture, I won't read every one of them, but adding perennial crops, planting legumes, or mixing that into your forages could be advantageous. But as we say, as we have more diversity, we have more opportunity for that soil biology to persist over time as well. Dr. Chris Viam put together this continuum of soil health, and I think using my gas gauge analogy again, we're still calibrating the gas gauge. But the lower the soil health, these are old production practice, continuous tillage and monoculture, the same crop year after year, we plow it every year. This is on the low end of soil health because we're constantly disturbing the soil. We just have crops out there during the growing season and we're fallow otherwise. And so that's the most detrimental to that microbial population below the surface. Now for the forage folks, where you have a perennial crop, that keeps bumping you up here on the higher end of the soil health spectrum, this continuum. That doesn't mean that you're a rock star and there's nothing you should be doing. That just means that by having perennial crops all the time, you're automatically helping the microbial population. And so perennial systems are typically on the high end, depending on how they are managed. Excuse me again. So here's an example in my county. This is a row crop system, but I just use this to exemplify, some of the worst case scenarios. And so this was a wet spring. Obviously, we've got sheet and reel erosion, which if there's any phosphorus and other nutrients involved with that soil, here's where it's going, right out the flow pipe here and into the ditch and on down the Missouri River. And those are quite frankly environmental systems that we can no longer support. It just gives us all a black eye in production, whether you're row crop or livestock. And so trying to wrap all this up, I want to go right on into the so whats. And that's a big crystal ball. And again, it depends on where you are at in your production management. So some of us can do a lot more to move in the right direction immediately. Some of us have to think in more detail of tweaking things that we're already doing. So from a forage standpoint, overgrazing is one of the most lasting and damaging approaches. Overgrazing has long-term impact in a negative way, no different than the row crop field that I showed with all the sheet and reel erosion. And so in the center slide here, you see, an attempt at managed intensive grazing, but you have compaction zones that expose the soil. And, if we would get a 3-inch rain, we'd have a lot of our soil move down the hill. And so really consider your grazing practices. The one on the right was during a drought, but they kept the livestock out there basically until they were eating dirt. Legumes, some of the things that we talked about, crop diversity, they provide more opportunity for the microbes to be diverse as well. And rotational grazing, as we know, provides the healthy rest periods as well. So a lot of what we do in forage production systems, if we just tweak what we're doing and make sure we're doing it to the best of our ability, we're providing pretty good opportunities for the soil microbes and that soil biology below the surface. And so more of the so what. We're in that information age. As you saw, Kent's an engineer and loves punching big sets of data around, but we're there. And our technology is allowing us to do that even better. So the mega data, the big data, they provide some complexity as far as crunching them. And that's why we lean on folks like Kent that love messing with that. And there's a lot more to learn. But our soil health assessment process can aid in some of our management decisions. And so having that assessment done at the shack may be another tool for you to gather information. So you want to gather as much as you can to inform those decision-making process. Even a few changes can add to your bottom line, even if you're already doing most everything right. We constantly have to think about increasing our bottom line. And again, the last thing would be the legacy for the next generation. And so even Lloyd Noble, the oil man or philanthropist, made the statement, no civilization has outlived the usefulness of its soil. When the soil is destroyed, the nation is gone. And that sort of goes back to the Indian Proverbs as well. It's just another way of stating it. We have to take care of the soil for this next generation.